periodically I warn people about the game Rachel Foster because it's on sale so often on the Switch, and I think most people would not want to put their money toward a game that glorifies child predators. But I am especially warning people now after learning that this horrifying game is getting a sequel this year. Now, I play a lot of video games with a lot of heavy themes. I'm quite used to heavy themes. I wrote heavy themes in my book. But this goes so far beyond heavy themes that there's no other way for me to interpret the narrative of this game other than glorifying a child predator. So if you haven't played it, don't. We will go over why, but make sure you also subscribe if you want more analysis to games, shows, movies, books. But first, I need to remind you that you're going to get a gift if you reserve a hardcover copy of my book, You Watched in Silence. And guys, I cannot tell you how much you can change the trajectory of my career, because if only 2% of my monthly viewers on here went and got a hardcover copy, you guys would put me directly on the New York Times bestseller list. So if you help me get on that list, the good news is you are going to get a signed book plate and a postcard from the fictional Salmon Island in my book. So you could have a first print edition of a New York Times bestseller with a signature in it. You do have to be in the US or Canada, but you can reserve a hardcover copy at any store. B&N helps me the most though, because they actually decide how much of a book they're going to stock based on those early reserved copies. Get your copy, then go fill out the form on my you know what. This is only for the first 1,000 people, so do not hesitate. Go get your copy now. You Watch in Silence is a family vlogging psychological thriller where a fan becomes nanny to a canceled family vlogger on a cozy Washington island. She soon faces both paranormal and parasocial horrors. AJ Finn, author of The Woman in the Window, has already read it. This is what he had to say about it. So if you like unreliable narrators, if you like gasping at the end of your books, you're going to enjoy this one. And again, I just cannot express enough how much your early support could completely change the trajectory of my career. This is my first book, and the success of it is super, super important. Now, I know there are other videos that are summarizing the game and the problematic aspects, and I'm going to summarize it too, so you can make a decision for yourself on what you think the writers were trying to do. But in addition to summarizing it, I'm going to explain why I, as a writer, feel pretty confident that this story glorifies child predators. When I've talked about this game in the past, the comment that I get the most is, just because this is the subject of a story doesn't mean that they are condoning child predators. There are a lot of stories that write about something and are not actually condoning it, and I know, because I'm a writer. I wrote a family vlogging horror novel very much based on things I've seen real family vloggers do. And I didn't write it to endorse family vlogging, very much the opposite. Which, just real quick, I do want to explain, a few people have expressed concern when I've said that this is based off things that real family vloggers do. People are concerned I am exploiting people's real stories, and I just want to clarify that. I promise I have not taken any child's real story and then fictionalized it. You are not going to find parallels in the Frankie case and this book. In fact, you are not even going to find any graphic abuse of a child in this book. It's very different than some of the publicized cases that you've seen. So when I say I am basing it off of things that real family vloggers have done, just know that I am talking about the adults, the parents, and the marketing tactics that they use in family vlogging, which, if you pay attention, you see these same tactics used again and again and again. So it's truly not based on any one person or any one person's story. I absolutely would not take someone's personal story and then exploit it in that way. I am so confident that there won't be any child now or ever who reads this book and thinks this is my story that she took, because I didn't. It's just that family vloggers do the same things over and over and over again. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to reserve a copy. But my point is that, of course, you can write a story that has a heavy topic that is not condoning that topic. You just need to use narrative techniques to show that you don't condone that topic. And this game not only doesn't use any of those techniques, I see narrative tactics that do the opposite, that really do seem to drive home the point that this child predator is a good person. And I'm not a simplistic reader, not a simplistic writer, so it's not like I need this narrative fed to me. I need it to be very clear. I need every character to say, this is bad. I need the main character to be like, oh, why am I so bad? I didn't know that being a child predator was so bad. No, I fully believe you can tell a lopsided narrative about a predator and still make it clear that that person is a predator. It's pretty famously done in the story Lolita, which, although Lolita is sometimes misinterpreted as being a genuine love story, there are a lot of tactics employed in that narrative that shows us that no, the main character is not a good guy. And if you haven't read that book, but you are a regular watcher of my content, I think another more accessible explanation for this would be Joe Goldberg in You. Joe is somebody who genuinely believes he is right, believes he's the hero of every story, always believes he's being wronged, but anyone watching can see that he is, always was, the problem. Obviously, there are viewers that defend him. I've seen it. I've seen the comments. There will always be people who misunderstand a narrative, but the point is, it's very clear that the show You was not written to glorify Joe or the things that he's done. We get a lot of subtext that he is in the wrong. And I understand that Lolita is a very controversial story, very much a story that's not for everyone. This isn't me saying go read it, because I think it could be triggering to a lot of people. But the most common comment I get when I talk about this game is that, oh, I bet you are one of those people that says Lolita is a story that approves of a child predator. And I'm not. I'm really not. I can see how that character is an unreliable narrator. There are cracks in his story that show just how miserable this little girl is, that this is not authentic or real love, that he's not capable of authentic or real love. But this is not that kind of story, because the subtext in this game gives us the exact opposite message of Lolita. But before I explain that subtext, let's just summarize the game. Rachel Foster is a game that takes place in 1993. It starts with Nicole reading a letter from her recently deceased mother about how she should sell her also recently deceased father old hotel to pay for college, the Timberline Hotel. And this hotel, the Timberline Hotel, is actually why I got the game, because I feel very nostalgic about The Shining. And I knew immediately, even before seeing the hotel, which it's very clear when you see the hotel that it is based off of the hotel in The Shining, but the name Timberline actually tipped me off to the fact that that's what they were going for. Because I happen to live fairly close to the Timberline Lodge in Oregon, which is the hotel where they filmed a lot of the scenes of The Shining from. So the fact that they used the name Timberline, which is where The Shining is filmed, immediately tipped me off that they were going for that kind of vibe. And they were. When you see screen grabs from the hotel, it's very clear that it is Shining inspired. So that made me want to check it out. And I'm also always scrolling like indie narrative games for sales. There are so many indie narrative games that I love. I can talk about them in other videos if you want. Big fans of stories like What Remains of Edith Finch. Also love indie horror like Oxenfree. Anyway, Rachel was estranged from her father when he passed away. She hadn't seen him in many, many years. And that's because he groomed one of her classmates, Rachel. They were both 16 at the time. He was her tutor, and he got her pregnant. And when that was revealed, Rachel ended up ending her life just 9 weeks into her pregnancy. And Nicole and her mother left town, which is reasonable reason to disappear and never talk to your father again. But one of the first red flags for the subtext of this game actually is in the letter that her mother left Nicole. She states that the affair your father had with that young woman and her subsequent unaliving broke our family. And immediately that was weird language to me in almost every way. First of all, because I wouldn't call a relationship with a literal child an affair. I feel like it's too lopsided to be a relationship. And it's especially weird and a red flag to me that Rachel is referred to as a young woman. A young woman. If I hear the sentence, he had an affair with a young woman, and that man is like 40 and above, what I'm thinking is he had an affair with a 21-year-old. Is that what comes to your mind? Yeah, he had an affair with a young woman, a young adult woman. I would never think that means a child. Granted, still very creepy to me. If you're 50 dating a 21-year-old, I think the power dynamics there are so weird. I don't trust that guy. I think you're an unethical person, but I will still acknowledge that you're dating an adult and not a child. But Nicole's dad, Leonard, very much was dating a child. Her mom goes on to say in the letter that, I know what you were thinking when Rachel took her life. You were thinking that Rachel did the right thing by ending her life. Again, wild thing to say about a girl who's a victim. And so the subtext we get from just that letter is that Rachel is really held as more responsible than Leonard. There seems like there's more hate, more contempt for Rachel in this letter, and she is definitely treated as an adult rather than a minor in this situation. And that maybe Nicole shares her mother's views that Rachel is more responsible, or at least equally responsible, for what happened. Now, I can't know that yet because I haven't met Nicole or what she thinks. But this alone was not a red flag to me as I was playing, because I thought that the subtext only existed to show that her mom was super unstable, that she was the kind of person who would blame a little girl for being groomed. She's obviously a very questionable character. It doesn't mean the message of the game is questionable. We've got to take in like the whole plot to understand what this subtext meant, what the writers wanted us to take from it. Because maybe the ultimate point of this game is that Nicole's mom was victim blaming, that Nicole accepted and absorbed that, and maybe the mom will end up being painted as unhinged in this story, which she very much is, just not in the way you would expect. So when Nicole gets to the hotel, she gets a call from this FEMA agent Irving who warns her that there is an incoming storm and that she is going to end up stuck at the timberline, which sucks because she was only planning to be there for like 20 minutes. Most of what we learn about Nicole though is through that dialogue with Irving. He's the only other speaking character in the game, so they talk through this like walkie-talkie cell phone thing. So it's through their conversations we learn who Nicole is as a person and what her history is. And as they are talking, we learn that actually, yeah, it does seem like Nicole does have contempt for Rachel. Because Irving has lived in the town a long time, he knows what happened with Rachel, he admits that he knows what happened with Rachel, they talk about Rachel from time to time, and every time Rachel is brought up, Nicole has this just livid tone, a tone that she doesn't have when she's just talking casually. She often doesn't refer to her by her name, she refers to her as that girl, which is just really dehumanizing. And I also took note of the fact that never in the game, not by Nicole, and I kind of think not by anybody, but I'll be willing to admit that maybe I missed this, but Nicole never calls Rachel a child, never calls her a kid. She does say girl and not woman, but she never refers to her as a minor, and no one does. When she talks about her dad's affair, she'll say things like, he ruined his life over a 16-year-old, but there's an emphasis on the fact that she was 16. She never says, he ruined his life because of a minor. He ruined his life because of a child. No, it's always that she's a 16-year-old. Like, that's better. Like we really need to drill in that she was 16 at the time of this, because like, that's so much different than like a 14-year-old, right? Which again is a red flag to me as a writer, because you use very specific terms to get your point across in a subtle way, right? To me, the writers are pushing down our throats that she was 16, she was 16, she was 16, she wasn't a child, she wasn't a little girl, she was 16, which I believe is even the age of consent in the state where they are. And when I have heard really creepy men justify the fact that they are attracted to 16-year-olds, that's the kind of language I hear. I hear she's 16, she's 17, they never talk about her as a minor, they never talk about her as a child, they'll talk about things like age of consent. So it's in my head that this is a dog whistle for the community that thinks it's actually okay to sleep with teenage girls. But again, I thought it might have been part of the character arc for Nicole, that she was often protecting herself and distancing herself from the reality of what her dad really did, but she was going to end the game by accepting that like, oh, I have been protecting myself, oh, my father was a predator. Because she's very angry at her dad and she was estranged from her dad, but know that it comes from like this anger of having an affair, being unfaithful to her mom. It never seems to come from like, how could my dad be such a predator, such a creep? And although Nicole does have all this contempt from her dad, because she states that she has this contempt from her dad, when she's walking through the hotel, what we get most from her between her and her dad are actually really lovely stories. She tells stories like the fact that she used to think the furnace was an old farting ghost and her dad would crack up about that. She mentions that her dad left her old room exactly as she left it, implying that he really cared that she left, that he really loved her. Talks about life lessons that he taught her. She tells almost no bad stories. That's the one thing I was looking for as I was playing. Like, where are the hints that actually her dad was this awful guy, had always been this awful guy, but instead the story was more like, my dad was so wonderful and he just had this affair. He ruined our family, but before that, I loved my dad. I was a daddy's girl. She even says that she didn't connect with her mom very much, even though she continued to live with her mom after the affair. But that is probably the most common, consistent thing about this game, is that you play it in consecutive days. It'll be like day 1, day 2, day 3, and there's not a lot of action, honestly. There's not a lot going on. I'll talk about in a second why I actually just don't think it's a good game, even if you take this out of it. I really don't. But the one thing we get every single day are good stories about her dad, and mostly her dad alone. We get almost no stories about her mom, except for the stories where her mom is in them, and it was a story about the dad as well. Does that make sense? Like, the mom is mentioned usually in conjunction with a story she had about her father. And in addition to getting so little about her mom, we actually get so little about Nicole, even though she's the main character of this game. Now, because she's in her childhood home, this hotel, it makes sense that she would be nostalgic, but she's only nostalgic. I don't know anything about Nicole. I don't know about her interest, if she's dating somebody. Does she have a roommate? Does she have friends? I think we find out that her and her mom lived in Portland, but like, does she like Portland? Is she generally happy? Is she generally depressed? I mean, we get almost nothing. And again, this is the main character. So to me, it just feels like really weak writing. I really need more than the fact that she had a bunch of great old memories with her dad. I want to know Nicole. And again, as a narrative tactic, all these stories that are great about her dad and the life that they used to live, they tell me that the writers are trying to humanize her dad. It's weird that they're all good stories about him, all of them, even though she has all this contempt for her dad. You'd think that she'd be able to find like one bad story. But this also wasn't a red flag to me because I could see a lot of directions that this narrative could go that would make a lot of sense. Like maybe this is a story about how hard it is to realize the man you loved, the man you idolized, your parent is a predator. The complicated relationship we have with our family when they do wrong. How hard it is to be the daughter of a monster and still love him anyway. Which I think would be a fair story to tell because that is very much a real human experience some people have to go through. We do love our parents and our family even when they do wrong. The emotions there are complicated. And I kind of thought that's where Nicole's character arc was going, that she was going to have to accept that her father was a monster and how hard it was to love him. But there were a lot of directions those positive memories could take us, and I thought we were going in one of those directions, but we were not. Now, most of the gameplay for like the first third of the game is just her walking around the hotel, talking to Irvin, like I said, and evaluating the state of the hotel. Although we don't really do anything evaluating. She just kind of looks around. And we do a lot of just like normal getting by stuff, like getting some food for ourselves in this snowstorm, turning on the furnace, getting the generator running, just stuff like that. But at one point she gets a phone call from someone saying, don't sell the hotel because Rachel is still there. And we learned through conversations between Rachel and Irving that Leonard, Nicole's dad, was an astrophysicist. And Rachel's dad was the Reverend in town. So these were two very prominent male figures in this town, and that has created a lot of rumors and a lot of weirdos who are obsessed with this story. So they chalk up the phone call to like one of those weirdos. But after Nicole finds an old lipstick tube in the basement of the hotel, the game switches up to her trying to figure out what really happened to Rachel. Which again, just to critique the writing in general, this was super weak writing to me. Because all that happens is she finds this old unopened lipstick tube, and it's an old brand that isn't used anymore. And she's like, this is the kind of lipstick that girls would wear in my school. They don't sell this lipstick anymore, and this lipstick has never been opened. And somehow, just that detail that it's an old unopened lipstick makes her think Rachel might still be in this hotel. And I'm thinking, how did you make that leap? First of all, this lipstick could be any of the people who went to this hotel at any time, anyone who snuck into the basement. It could be anybody's lipstick. You said it yourself, it's obviously not a new lipstick because it's not sold anymore and it's never been opened. So someone probably dropped it in the basement like 10 years ago and nobody noticed because people don't frequently go into the basements of hotels. She only went because she needed to turn on the generator. So even if it was Rachel's lipstick, it still makes no sense because the most likely scenario is that Rachel dropped it 10 years ago before she passed away because, you know, she was seeing her father. She would have obviously been at the hotel. It makes sense that she would drop a lipstick at the hotel. Never went back for it, never opened it. It's an old lipstick. Why does that make her think that Rachel really is still here? I feel like this clue should have been much clearer, should have actually pointed to Rachel being there in real time somehow, but it sends Nicole on this spiral. She digs up a bunch of old newspapers that are at the hotel and old journals by her father, old letters, and she does find some like mismatch information, like a graphologist read Rachel's note that she left before she ended her life and said that it wasn't consistent with her handwriting. Again, weak writing to me because if a forensic graphologist said that, why did they just be like, okay, open and close case, Rachel ended her life? Seems like they would have investigated it a little more, kept the case open. And there are some hints that the Reverend was the one who hurt his daughter because he demanded complete perfection from Rachel, and he obviously also would have been very unhappy to hear about her and Leonard. And she finds an old journal from her father that is dated after Rachel's passing, and it has a bunch of scribbled notes, and a lot of them reference Rachel. He'd say things like, Rachel is sad, I heard you, Rachel, you were right behind me, Rachel doesn't want to do speech therapy today, just stuff like that. She explores the hotel for more clues, and we learned that every year they would throw a Christmas party at the hotel in the big ballroom. And she describes how her mom only had eyes for her dad, but her dad had eyes for that girl. And she says during this memory that like Rachel wore this beautiful dress with a bow on the back, and she talked and moved with the grace and the confidence of an adult woman. Real line, we are saying about a 16-year-old that was a victim. That she walked and talked with the grace and confidence of an adult. Again, this is whistleblower language to me for men who think like this, who see teen girls and think, she's so close to an adult. She walks like an adult. She has the maturity of an adult. It's literally a groomer line to be like, you're so much more mature than other girls your age. Just such weirdo red flag language. Again, I thought that it was going to be part of Nicole's character arc that she realized how weird it was that she ever thought of Rachel as a grown adult. And we also learned that the Christmas party was 1 year before Rachel ended her life. And she ended her life when she was 16 years old, which means, guess what? Rachel was 15 when Leonard was grooming her. So for all this mention of a 16-year-old, no, she was 15 when this started. And I guarantee you, she wasn't purposely trying to move with the grace and the confidence of an adult. In fact, we get other parts of this narrative that directly contradict this and describe Rachel as a very insecure girl. But even if she was trying to emulate an adult, which I will admit that some teenage girls do, some teenage girls try to act a little older than they are for whatever reason. They want to feel more mature, they want to feel more adult. That's why lines like, "You're so mature for your age," work on teen girls, because they desire that. Regardless, no sane, normal person looks at a 16-year-old and thinks, that's an adult. She was a child, she was always a child, that doesn't matter. So when I know the end of the game, and then I look back on this dialogue, I think, why did you guys write that? That's really weird you wrote that when the narrative of the game ended the way it did. Does not make me feel really reassured in you guys as writers. The following night, Nicole sleepwalks into the old church that's right by the hotel. And this sends her on another spiral. She's like, maybe I slept walk there for a reason, because I haven't slept walked since I was a kid and I went straight to that church. Maybe it's some kind of sign. But that's like the lipstick. To me, like, that's not a clue. I wouldn't think that just because I slept walk into a church, if I have a history of sleepwalking, that means that there's something going on, but whatever. We get very weak connection points from one plot point to the next. But this makes her explore the hotel, and guys, I do have to warn you, this is the creepiest and most triggering part of the game. And it's also probably the only clue we have to the fact that actually this isn't okay. Like, if I was searching with all my might for signs that the writers left, narrative techniques that the writers used to show us that this relationship with Rachel wasn't okay, this would be the one and only clue. But it's way too weak of a clue to justify the way that the narrative wraps up. But Nicole stumbles upon what seems to be a recreation of Rachel's room with Rachel's things inside, and it's heavily implied that this recreation was done by her father after her passing. It's hidden, and it literally looks like a little girl's room. Again, she's never called a child in the game, she's never called a minor. So this is our one clue that, like, yes, this is a kid. The R slur is written on the wall, which is what other kids used to call Rachel because she had a learning disability. And yes, you heard me right. Rachel had a learning disability, and Leonard was her tutor because of her learning disability. He's an astrophysicist. She is a 16-year-old insecure about her intelligence because she has a learning disability, and he groomed her. It's so sick. It's so sinister. Again, this is the one time I felt in the game like, okay, we're finally moving in the direction that I expect. We're saying this is so weird. This is so not okay. But the narrative just doesn't go that direction. Okay, so Nicole finds a key in this room, and it's to her old music box. And here we find out that Nicole had a hockey game the night that Rachel ended her life. She came home really excited to tell her dad about it, but her dad seemed to have other things on his mind. Her mom confronted him about what was happening with Rachel. There was a lot of fighting and yelling. And so when she opens the music box, we find that old hockey medal from the night she won. And she says that she believes this is her dad trying to lead her to see that night in a new light. Again, I'm sorry, but as a writer, what a reach. What weak writing that is. She just sees a hockey medal and she's like, this is definitely my dad, specifically wanting me to see that night in a different light. You found a key to your music box in Rachel's recreation room, and you think that's a message from your father beyond the grave to look at this specific night. My goal as a writer is to make all my characters feel as real and as human as possible. And if I'm asking myself, how would a real person react to this? I'm thinking like the most generous interpretation of this is that a real person would look at that medal and be like, aw, maybe my dad regretted that he didn't pay attention to my hockey game that night. Maybe he regretted that he didn't come. He kept my hockey medal in my music box. Maybe he really did love me. That's like the most I could think is a message from your dad. To take it so specifically to like, my dad wants me to see that night in a new light. She hasn't spoken to this man in years, has no idea what he thinks or wants anymore. Why would you assume that you need to see this night in a new light? It's so specifically the writers just telling us outright, so blurting it out. Oh, you, the audience, needs to reflect on that night in a new light. They're just saying it. And maybe you think I'm being petty, critiquing the writing, and it's not something that I usually do. If you watch my normal content, I actually spend very, very little talking about what I don't like in narrative. I focus on what I do like, because I just think there's like this wave of content now that is so specifically like hate content, trying to trigger your anger, and it's making us like critical of media to the point that like we're not being critical, we're hating just to hate, and we're not taking a critical lens to things. I could talk about that in a whole other video. Honestly, I feel very passionate about that, but I specifically don't talk about things I hate. I focus on shows that I love, and I focus on what I like about those shows that I love. So this is out of character for me, but I have a point here in criticizing the writing. And that point is that there is so much weak writing in this game that people often accuse me of like not understanding the subtext, not understanding the deeper meaning of this narrative, as if it's just so deep and so mysterious, I cannot fathom it. But it's not. It's not mysterious. It's not deep. They blurt things out. They have really weak clues. These are not really, really talented writers who told a story so complex that most of us are missing it. They told a really weak and straightforward story, which makes me think their message is also straightforward. I'm not missing anything, and neither are you. So anyways, she now sets out to see the night in a new light. Again, I don't know how she's gonna do this. She ends up just like walking around the hotel again, and she ends up in this closet where she finds a bunch of mannequins, and then there's one mannequin holding her old hockey stick above another mannequin on the floor with a baby in her arms. And she's like, oh, this is Rachel. Somebody went to end Rachel's life, but why are they holding my hockey stick? She jumps very quick to the conclusion that this is representative of Rachel's life being ended, and thinks, well, maybe Rachel didn't end her life, maybe someone ended it for her. If you've forgotten, throughout this whole plot, Nicole is on the walkie-talkie with Irving. That's how we get all of Nicole's feelings, all of her stories. So she tells Irving about this like mannequin room, and Irving immediately gets all ominous and creepy, and he's like, how many doors have you opened, Nicole? How many still need to be opened? She goes on to find another weird room with a bunch of like maps on the wall, like you would see in like a detective movie, you know what I mean, with the red string everywhere. It's so clear that somebody's been trying to figure something out, with like old news clippings, missing posters of Rachel. And Irving says this is his room, and he led Nicole there. And it's implied he's been in the hotel the whole time, which is weird to me because I'll talk about this in a second, but this game has not been scary so far, and it would have been such like a scary, intense moment for him to like walk out and reveal himself, for us to see him for the first time. Like, we haven't been alone in this hotel this whole time. That's so creepy. We never see Irving, even though supposedly he's in the hotel with us. He never pops up. But we continue to just talk to him through the walkie-talkie. Even though he's there, why wouldn't he come talk? Anyways, he confesses that he is Rachel's brother. He explains that he had a really rough childhood, but Rachel was his shining star. She was the only person he really loved, who protected him, but he would hear her crying at night because of all the bullying, and he wanted so badly to protect her, but he couldn't. But then one day she met someone who finally saw her for real. That person is obviously Leonard, and he says he is a witness to what happened between him and Rachel. And what happened between him and Rachel was just a love. Just an honest and simple love. But that love was too much for some people to bear, and that love was going to be punished. And Rachel was the one who was punished, and she paid with her life for that love. If you're having a hard time processing, you heard me right. Irving is not a FEMA agent. He's Rachel's brother, and he believes that Leonard truly loved his sister. They had an honest, authentic love. He approved of the relationship. He thought Leonard was the first person to actually protect Rachel. when he was the person who took advantage of her insecurities. So now the only person we have in this story who doesn't approve of Rachel and Leonard is still just Nicole. Although, again, not for like the grooming creepy reasons, but for the affair reasons. But just wait. She finds another room with a projector and a tape recording of her dad's voice. He says that he was hearing Ghost Rachel in the hotel, and him and Irving were trying to translate Rachel's ghost messages. A lot of mumbo jumbo about love and how some people will hate it out of jealousy. And he says he's figured out what Rachel said and why she's here, but now he's gonna end his life. So I guess that's how he passed away. After we've watched the images on the projector and listened to Leonard, we get another call from Irving. And Irving says, like, I'm not kidding, guys. He says that Leonard was a really special man and his heart was big enough to love both Rachel and Nicole. That's the message Irving is trying to get across. Nicole, your dad really loved you, and he had enough love in his heart to love your 16-year-old classmate romantically and still love you as a daughter. Ugh. Ugh. They're the same age, in the same class. He tutored her. Can you imagine loving your daughter, your little girl, and then seeing another little girl the same age and seeing her as a romantic interest? Ugh. Irving even goes on to say that the only reason that Nicole doesn't approve is that she was just a selfish, jealous little girl. I still had hope for this story. At this point, I thought this was when we were going to learn that, like, Irving was a twisted villain, that he was a horrible brother, that he also mistreated Rachel. Like, that's what it seems like it's leading up to, right? Like, Leonard is unhinged. Irving is unhinged. Nicole's got to escape this hotel, and she's going to realize that all these men are just so messed up. And that they were always the ones who were messed up, and Rachel was never to blame. I was just waiting for Nicole to confront Irving and be like, you are a sick, twisted freak. And now hearing you talk about your sister, talk about her insecurities, I realized she was just an insecure little girl that my dad took advantage of. He creeped on your sister, and you should know better. And Nicole says she did hate Rachel, and she did hate her dad, but she empathizes with Irving. Irving's not really receptive to this, and so Nicole goes down to the garage to try to escape. But then as she does, she suddenly remembers that night. And what she remembers is that she saw her mom that night holding her hockey stick, looking very angry and dangerous. But then when she saw Nicole, she seemed to calm down. She told Nicole that she had recently cleaned her hockey stick, and she gave it to her, and she took her to the hockey game. But she had ended Rachel's life that night with the hockey stick, put her in the back seat. They drove to the hockey game with her. In the middle of the hockey game, her mom drove off, dumped her body off the cliff. And Irving thanks her for this information because he never could be sure what happened that night. And then he says that he's going to end his life. And again, he leaves the hotel to end his life. We never see him, which I feel like is just weird. So this like big realization is obviously that her mom was unhinged, that her mom blamed this little girl, ended this little girl's life, and that's all fine and well. Clearly her mother was a horrific person. However, for some reason, just the fact that her mom ended Rachel's life just makes her dad the hero in the situation. Like, she just changes her mind and accepts Irving's and her father's view of it, that they had a real authentic love and her mom was just so jealous. It makes no sense because even with her mom doing that, the dad is still a groomer. Like, nothing has changed about their relationship. What about your mom also being unhinged changes your view of your father? You just had two horrible parents. Instead, the way this game ends is that Nicole feels horribly guilty for hating her father and being estranged from her father because of his relationship with Rachel, because really his relationship with Rachel wasn't bad. It was her mother that was the problem. So Nicole decides to end her life, and she does this in great detail. You actually basically have to go step by step to end her life in a very specific way that I won't even talk about. I don't believe in talking about somebody taking their life this specifically in media, because studies have shown it is literally a dangerous thing to do. When a big show or a movie shows someone ending their life step by step, the rates of people ending their life go up. So anyone in psychology will tell you, you shouldn't talk in much detail about people ending their lives. But just know that as her life is ending, never once does Nicole say, like, my mother was evil, but so was my dad, or even implies that anything was wrong with their relationship. Not once. She just ends her life on that note of like, guess my mom was the one in the wrong. and I should feel really bad that I didn't love my groomer father. And before I analyze just how badly this narrative was done, I do want to talk about the actual gameplay as somebody who loves horror games and how much this game just failed to be horror, except that it's a horrifying message. Clearly inspired by the Shining Hotel, that's an excellent place to give us something creepy, some ghosts, some haunting, some jump scares, and we get none of that. Even though there's so many opportunities for them. I was always thinking we were like about to be spooked. Like at one point we get locked in the fridge, and when we turn around, I think we're gonna see something creepy, but like we don't, the door just opens. At another point, the lights all go out in the hotel and she has to use a Polaroid camera as a flash to see any light. And so she's flashing that camera like every few seconds, and you think like something's gonna pop out, some ghost is gonna pop out, but nothing does. Irving at one point finds this unreleased tape of these ghost hunters, and they ran out of a very specific room. So Nicole goes to that room. Again, thought we'd see something haunting, thought we'd see a ghost, but we just see other old footage of them leaving the room. It's implied that Rachel is a ghost at the hotel. We definitely never see her as a ghost or see her do one single ghostly thing. I don't even think this should be marketed as horror. It's suspense at most. But the message of the game is horrifying. And whenever I talk about this, whenever I've posted about it, I always get people telling me that I simply don't understand it on a deep enough level. If the real point of this game is that actually that relationship between Leonard and Rachel was horrific, and that both Nicole and Irving and Leonard, every character we see in this game was in the wrong, then we need to use real narrative techniques to show that they were wrong. For this to be like a Lolita story where our narrator is unreliable, we need to actually see clues that our narrator is, you guessed it, unreliable. With a character like Joe Goldberg, we see so clearly from the beginning that he has very extremist ideas, that his feelings don't line up with reality, that he does things that we would not consider any normal person capable of doing, like stalking someone. And that's all we really need in you to know that Joe Goldberg is wrong. His extreme point of view, his misogynistic thoughts, his obsessive actions. We also have other subtext in the show you, but even if that's all we had, that would be enough. That's pretty much all we had in a story like Lolita, and it was enough. For that to be the narrative tactic they employ to show that this is wrong, we need to see Nicole as an unreliable narrator. Whether she's suffering from past traumas or mental illness, or she's just an indecent, evil person herself. But we don't get those clues because, like I said earlier on, we get almost nothing of Nicole. She is a one-dimensional character I know nothing about. I don't know her mental state. I don't know her belief system. I don't know anything. She is the one character we should know most about, and she is just this flat, nothing character that seems like a fill-in to show us that Leonard was actually a good dad. But since that's all we get, I don't feel like I know Nicole very much. I think that the only portrayal of her is that she's a pretty average person. She's fairly stable. There's nothing that implies she's unstable. She's a little annoying. I found her character annoying through the game, but nothing like deeply flawed. And in fact, the only time we actually see her as unstable is after the realization happens and she decides to end her life. But she decides to end her life because of that realization and because her guilt is so severe for not loving her groomer father. So that doesn't stand on its own as the reason why she would think that this is okay. We just know that she thinks it's okay because she wants to end her life. We don't get any of the backstory to get that she is unstable. I even saw another professional critique of this game specifically say that this moment where she ends her life feels super out of character, feels out of left field. There was nothing leading up to it. There was nothing implying that Nicole was unhappy or that she was a person who was even capable of ending her life. She just ends it. That 180 twist of accepting her father to the point that she wants to end her own life is just completely out of place. It's even implied that she's only doing it because Rachel is forcing her to do it with some ghostly power, so it definitely doesn't imply that she herself is an unstable person, and that's why she would think this relationship is okay. And if anything, the fact that she's portrayed as this stable person throughout the game is subtext for the opposite message, that the relationship is okay, because here is this girl who is stable, is sensible, is practical and logical, and she finds the realization of the truth and she is so distraught by it she decides to end her life, just emphasizing that the relationship was so good, was so true, was so loving that the guilt of not seeing that overtakes her. So if anything, her stability as a character is subtext for the message that this relationship is good. And it's also the most common way to show the message or the moral of a story is to take your main character's character arc and have it end in the place that you want the message of the story to be. That's why characters grow through stories. That's why characters' perspectives change. That end perspective is usually the perspective that the writer is trying to portray to you. For her to go from the perspective of hating her father to loving her father without any other context or technique, all it tells me is that's the message you want me to get. And I won't say always, like there's always exceptions. There are character arcs that go from good to bad, but again, they use other tactics to show that the character is still bad, that the message is still bad. There's lots of ways you can do this. And making your narrator unreliable and twisted is not the only way to show that you don't condone a topic of your story. We could employ another tactic that we see in the show You, which is that we get the true message, the true moral from other characters. Those moments where Joe is confronted by Beck and Bronte expose all of Joe's flaws and highlight the greater point of the show, which is that he's a predator. You know, when Beck yells things like, yeah, I cheated, yeah, I've done bad things, but I didn't hurt people, I didn't end anyone's life, you did that. Very common to use other characters to explain just how wrong the main character is in their views. But the only other character on screen, I guess it's just his voice, but still, the only other character we get is Irving. And he's certainly not challenging Nicole's views. In fact, the only view he does challenge is the view that Nicole doesn't approve of that relationship. He calls her a jealous child. She just isn't capable of seeing true love. And is he ever portrayed as a demented character we shouldn't trust? Is he ever portrayed as unstable? No. Throughout the game, he's a very kind, reliable guy. And then at the twist moment, he's still portrayed as a kind, reliable brother, a protective brother, which bothers me deeply, deeply, because Irving is the only person who saw Rachel intimately, who was capable of telling us about Rachel, which he never does. He really never gives us Rachel's personality or anything about who she was as a person. But if he was protective of her, if he was the person who loved her most, then he should have been the one advocating for Rachel and seeing how horrific her relationship with Leonard was. And instead, the one character who loved her, the one character who was protective of her, was defending her being groomed without any context to him actually being a bad brother. Because obviously sometimes family members act protective, but they're really controlling, they're really jealous, they're really abusive. But he wasn't. He was actually portrayed as a loving brother and then still condoned this relationship. And I find that so disturbing because there's no excuse for it. If Irving was still a child, then we can say that he was also manipulated by Leonard, or he didn't understand the difference in this extreme age gap. But this happened a decade ago, so Irving's an adult. Because he's an adult, he should know better. I can't tell you how many times I've heard a woman talk about the fact that when she was a teenager, she dated somebody like in their 20s, and she thought she was really cool for it, really mature. And then when she reached her 20s and looked back at 16 and 17-year-olds, she was like, oh my God, that was really wrong. Something was really wrong there, because I cannot look at a 16-year-old and see them as a potential partner. That's impossible for me. It's really disturbing that that happened. Sometimes it takes age for us to really get the gap, and the fact that no sane, stable person would be attracted to a 16-year-old. And Irving's an adult, so that's how he should view the world. He should look at other 16-year-olds now and be like, oh my God, that was my sister. That was my sister that I loved. I can't believe that happened. Leonard is a freak. And again, if this is some kind of trauma-based response, if Irving is really mentally ill, then we need to see that as the audience. We need evidence of that. We can't just go assuming that, because one of the arguments I get the most in my comments, and there is some argument to be made for this being a possibility, is that Leonard is actually just a master manipulator. He tricked not just Rachel, but also her brother, and then he even managed to trick his daughter from beyond the grave. But again, if that was the point of the story, there is not enough subtext to show that. We could have gotten that subtext in one of Nicole's many, many, many stories of Leonard's. Little hints, little clues in her stories that he was manipulating her as a child, that he was a naturally manipulative guy. And instead, all we get over and over again are these lovely stories of a loving father who's trying to guide his daughter through life. If he was some master manipulator, why was he not capable of manipulating his wife? Why was he not capable of manipulating Nicole Nicole when she was still a teenager? Why didn't he manipulate her into thinking what he'd done was okay then? It would have been easier to convince a 16-year-old that this was all fine and that this was true love than to convince a grown woman, a 26-year-old woman, when you're not even there, you're not even in the room, you're just a tape recording. So we're implying that he can manipulate her through a tape recording, but he couldn't do it in real life? What were the actual actions that Leonard took in real life that show him being a manipulative person? Being good at being manipulative, good enough to justify tricking both Irving and Nicole. We don't get anything. We don't get a single story that implies he's a manipulative person. And so if we take all of that subtext, that he was really a good guy, that Nicole was stable, that Irving was a loving brother, and we take all that together, then the only conclusion you can make is that the writers actually think that you can have a loving, authentic relationship between a grown man and a 16-year-old. And the very last argument I ever hear from people is that, like, oh, well, you don't need any of those narrative clues, you don't need the context, you don't need the subtext, because the real clue is that this is a bad thing. That socially this is a bad thing. We know that men can't date 16-year-olds. We know that he was her tutor. We know that there was an imbalance in the relationship. So we don't need any of the characters to tell us. We just know it. And although I think that's bad writing, I will admit that sometimes in stories that's true. Sometimes stories lean into the fact that you should know what's wrong or right already, and you'll make those conclusions yourself. Even if every character in the story thinks that the wrong thing is the right thing, you'll understand that it's not. The thing is, when we are employing that as a tactic and we're using no narrative technique to show that something is bad, that thing that is bad has to be so bad that we will never ever question it, that we all agree it's bad. I'm talking like, we know that Nazis are bad, right? Granted, in this day and age, I guess some people don't. But you need something really extreme that we all agree on. And unfortunately, the reality of life is that not everyone agrees on this. I have seen real grown men argue that it is normal and natural to be attracted to a 16-year-old. In fact, there are male podcasters out there saying that exact thing, that a woman is at her prime when she's 16 and everything else is downhill from there. Historically, we used to marry 16-year-olds, so it makes sense. I've seen so many arguments saying that this is okay. So many men justifying their weirdo attraction to 16-year-olds. And I know people will argue that culturally it is a minority. Culturally, we do know that a 16-year-old can't consent, but I would argue that culturally we don't. Because just a decade ago, there was Courtney Stodden. She was a 16-year-old whose parents consented to her marrying a much older actor, and everyone was okay with it. The media, in fact, would make fun of her, would insult her, would call her a gold digger, would call her trampy. Other celebrities would make fun of her. Chrissy Teigen would tweet at her, this child, to taunt her about the fact that she was a child bride. And why? Because she looked a little more womanly. She was really filled out. We treated her like a woman and not a little girl. We didn't ask ourselves, like, what parents would consent to their daughter marrying a grown man? And when the man was so rich, I think we should have been asking ourselves, did money change hands? Is this a trafficking situation? And instead, we, as a society, all made fun of Courtney. And she has come forward since then to say just how painful that time in her life was, just how traumatic it was, just how badly she was treated, how she went from the toxic relationship of her parents to that marriage, the horrible power dynamics. If it was so obvious to us, if we so culturally agreed that a 16-year-old cannot consent to being with an older man, then 10 years ago, we wouldn't have all been ignoring the very clear signs that Courtney Stodden wasn't okay. I fear we haven't come that far in 10 years. I hope we would condemn it more. I hope there would be more think pieces and news articles about how, wait, maybe this isn't cool, but let's just not pretend that we've come so far that there can't be a person out there who thinks that this is okay and writes a story showing that it's okay. There very much can. So if that's true, if there is at least a portion, even if it's a smaller portion, and I think it is a smaller portion, but not small enough, even if there's a small portion of the population that thinks that this is okay, then you have to acknowledge the possibility that it was written by someone who thinks this is okay. A man who believes that you can date a 16-year-old is perfectly capable of writing a narrative and making a game. What is the evidence that this story wasn't made by someone like that and that that's not what they wanted? You need to give me the evidence in the story, and I don't have that. I don't have that evidence. Again, like I've said, I've gotten a lot of dog whistles to the contrary, a lot of terminology and arguments in this story within the narrative that I have heard those men use, and so to me, it just leans that direction. But I do acknowledge I don't know. I'll never know the true intentions of the writers because I don't think they'll ever come out and say that, like, yeah, actually we do want grown men dating 16-year-olds. I think they know that that would cause a lot of outrage, and they definitely wouldn't be getting a sequel if they said that. So I will never ever know. But I do know that the very, very, very best interpretation of this is that it was written horrifically. Writers are so weak that they don't know how to get a basic point across, and I think that's a very charitable interpretation, but fine. Even in that scenario, this is a dangerous story. Don't write these themes if you cannot handle it with the grace and sensitivity that it deserves. These writers handled it horribly, sent a horrible message, did it in a way that is really triggering and traumatic. Even if they didn't intend to, that deserves to be called out. It does glorify child predators, even if that wasn't their intent. It's written so badly that it does that. And again, that's the most charitable interpretation, that they just wrote it badly. It's not honestly my interpretation. If you were asking me my opinion, and again, I don't know the truth, I lean heavily towards this was a purposeful decision to make the message that sometimes men really love 16-year-olds and it's honest and authentic. And you know why I believe that? You know why I honestly do believe that? Because as a writer, I could have fixed this game in a second with one item. One in-game item would have solved all of this. I'm curious if this is coming to your guys' heads too. So like pause and tell me if you can think of a way to just fix all this with something really, really simple. Now granted, I've been ghostwriting for 10 years. I've ghostwritten for celebrity clients, and part of that is not just editing my manuscripts, but I've also done something called book doctoring, which is where you take someone else's manuscript and they pay you to fix it, to do developmental edits, line edits, make it its sharpest version of itself. So it's my job to fix narrative, and I do think I'm good at it. But even so, this is such an easy fix that I have a hard time believing that any writer wouldn't see it and wouldn't employ this tactic, especially because this in-game item already exists as another item. It would have been so easy to do. Because the one thing that we never get, and the one tactic that is the easiest as a writer to employ to get your point across, is the perspective of the victim. We get nothing about Rachel. Nothing. We hear Nicole's perspective, that she acted like a confident adult. We hear Irving say that she was the light of his life, and we hear Leonard say that he was in love with her, but not any of these characters tell us anything about Rachel, her perspective, her point of view, how she felt about Leonard. Nothing. Nicole was one-dimensional, but Rachel is like 100 times more one-dimensional. We know nothing, and the game is named after her. It's based after her. She is the victim experiencing this trauma, so why didn't they give us any of her? Especially when it was so easy to give us all of her with, drumroll please, the simple item of Rachel's journal. The same way we got Leonard's journal, give us Rachel's journal. It would have taken a couple diary entries to show that she was manipulated, she was groomed, she was not happier for being in this relationship, she was not loved. It would have been so simple to show us that, and then we would have known that every other character was wrong, that they were all twisted, they were all demented, and really Rachel was deeply hurt by this relationship. That's all it would have taken. A diary in her room. Why didn't they want to show us her perspective? Again, these are the questions I ask as a writer. If I'm focused so much that I'm going to name my title after a character, I'm going to give that character at some point. Maybe I wait to the end to give it. I'm not saying that we need Rachel from the beginning. It would have been part of the narrative of showing how toxic everyone was to show this diary at the end. To me, the fact that it was left out and that we don't even get anything about her personality other than like, she has a learning disability, which isn't her personality, that she cried at night. I mean, that she acted like an adult woman. Why wouldn't they give us any of Rachel? It just feels purposeful to me as a writer. With her being such a focus of the narrative, it feels like on purpose. And again, if they wanted to show Rachel's pain, a diary would have done that and it would have solved everything. It wouldn't have changed the story. It wouldn't have changed the game. It was such a simple fix. But what did the creators say were their intentions? Because obviously they were asked, there were interviews, and I want to be fair enough to say what they said. But first of all, even though they are saying one thing, I do want to identify that I am suspicious of these answers, and I will tell you why. Now, they said they offered different perspectives of Leonard and Rachel's relationship because they wanted to explore this moral dilemma. And I do want to point out, first and foremost, there are not different perspectives. This game ends with one perspective, which is that it's okay. But I also want to point out just how suspicious I am of that wording, that they wanted to explore this moral dilemma. A dilemma is a choice between two things, generally two bad things. A moral dilemma is like the trolley problem. Do you end the life of one person or 5 people? That's a moral dilemma. Where was the choice here? What was the dilemma? What were the two choices? Why did Leonard have to choose to date a child? And why did other people around him have to choose whether or not they condoned it? That is not a moral dilemma. And I'm so suspicious of anyone that would call it that. Because I feel like most people would say this isn't a moral quandary. It's just an unequivocal, that is wrong, that is horrible, that is wrong, that is not okay. And even if we're assuming that there is a dilemma, there isn't, I am going to challenge the idea that we should let players critically explore this kind of moral dilemma. I think that's dangerous. I think it's dangerous in, again, a culture where just 10 years ago we were all condoning it, and I think it's dangerous when we know that plenty of men do condone it. I don't think that this is the kind of thing that you should let people draw their own conclusions. I think it's the kind of thing that if you want to write a subject that is so triggering, so traumatic, so clearly horrific for the victims who experience it, then you need to explicitly say this is wrong. If you're going to use that to tell a story and to have this shock value, which a lot of this game feels like it's shock value, then you better do it justice to the people who experience it, to the victims who experience, by saying unequivocally, this is wrong. Another thing they say is that they claim that the only reason that Irving and Nicole condone the relationship is to show how people can be run by their emotions. As I've already explained, they didn't show that anywhere in the narrative. Why wasn't Nicole blinded by her emotions as a teen? She obviously loved her father. Why did it change now? How was Irving blinded by his emotions? We learned so little about his relationship with Leonard. How did Leonard manipulate him? Why would he feel such strong emotions that that relationship is okay? We are not shown any of that. That simply wasn't shown, and I can't help but think that if I was somebody who did write this to condone being with a 16-year-old, that this is the kind of thing I would say to cover myself from the criticism without actually having done that work, without actually having utilized this in the narrative. I would say like, oh, it's just to show how people can be tricked by their emotions. Again, I'll never know. These are assumptions. I'm not alleging that I know what the creators wanted to do. I'm just saying this was not done in this story. Also said that they put the story in Montana because the legal and religious framework, aka the legal framework that you can date a 16-year-old, was a plausible narrative to explore the moral taboo. Again, this is dog whistle language to me from the kind of men who think this relationship is okay, because what moral taboo are you talking about? In what world is dating a child a taboo? A taboo is something that we all culturally decide is not okay. It's something that is prohibited by a social custom. So if you're saying it's a moral taboo to date a child, what you're saying is it's a taboo because the social custom is not to date children, not that it's just wrong. You're saying that we don't do that because socially it's wrong, not because it's actually wrong. Like, that's what I'm hearing. Like, this is the kind of language that is very suspicious to me. When I think of taboo, I think like liking feet is taboo. It's not actually hurting anyone, but it is a social taboo. How is this taboo and not just a crime? I mean, they basically admitted that it's not a crime because they said it in Montana, and they did that very specifically. Why did they need to set it in a state where it was legal? That never comes into play. Legality never comes into play. Why did they put it in a state where there was a legal framework to date a 16-year-old? Other than to make it clear that it's not a crime, that we need to analyze it from not a criminal perspective because it's not a crime. It's just the kind of language I expect to hear from people who actually think it's okay to date teens. Here's what they said that makes me suspicious that they're willing to be dishonest. Because again, I don't know, this is all alleged, but I really think this was a dishonest answer. Because they said they brought on professionals to deal with these sensitive topics. And I do not think that they sought out real, objective professionals to get their opinion on this narrative. Because I can't think of a real, objective professional that would condone the way this game ends. Because like I said, there's a lot of research showing that you should not do a step-by-step of how to unalive yourself. And you definitely shouldn't force your audience to do it. You don't have a choice, by the way, if I didn't say that. You can get an ending where she doesn't finish ending her life, but you do not get to choose whether she finishes. That's just an ending that like is randomly generated. But if you get the ending where she has to end her life, you have to end her life. There's no choice. I tried not to. So you're telling me you just happened upon professionals in this field who were like, yeah, no, it's okay to force people to have to end her life step by step. I don't think that you did. And I definitely don't think there's any professional who would say this was handled well from a victim's perspective, that this wouldn't be extremely triggering for a victim of grooming, because it would be. And the way that they don't include the victim's story or their perspective, I don't believe that professionals in the field of psychology would sign off on this. Maybe they found a therapist that they knew, a friend or something, who like just signed on the dotted line that they thought that this was okay so that they could pull that up later. I don't know, but I don't think that they really sought objective professional opinions. By the way, I'm not even saying that like you should never include stories where people end their lives. I bought this game knowing the title of this game, and I have written these kind of dark themes. I haven't done it that specifically. And like I said, I wouldn't. I just think if you're going to handle these dark topics, you should do so in a way that is trauma-informed, is considerate to victims, is considerate to whether you may be triggering people. Because there are people who would be triggered by doing something step by step who probably still got this game because they thought it was going to cover the topics of unaliving yourself, but probably didn't expect to see anything as graphic as was in the game. I think that like warnings should be a lot more explicit if they are this graphic. Don't think most people expected an instruction manual on how to end your life, because I don't really think that should exist. It doesn't add anything but shock value. It really doesn't add anything to the story. It doesn't inform us anymore about it from a trauma perspective. There's just no reason for it. So you can make your own decision about the intention of this game, but regardless of intention, it was done in a way that was very dangerous, very triggering, used the talking points of real predators, and they certainly won't be getting my money for a sequel. But don't forget, when you reserve a hardcover copy of my book, if you are in the US and Canada, you are going to get a signed book plate and a postcard from the fictional Salmon Island. And you'll also help me so much in getting my debut book some more visibility. As a trigger warning, it does cover very dark topics, and you can get those warnings on my website. But I do believe in handling dark themes from a place that is trauma-informed and victim-informed and is not for shock value. Make sure you subscribe if you want more media analysis. Let me know what game, book, movie you want me to do next.